I am Kendare Blake, and this is a story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Tim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Kendare Blake.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. You can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. And when you're there, click on the subscribe buttons in the right-hand sidebar. There's places where you can subscribe in iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher Radio and even YouTube, hankgarner.com. I'd like to thank some sponsors that make this show possible. Grammarly. Go to getgrammarly.com/Hank to sign up for your free account. Grammarly, built by linguists and language lovers, Grammarly's writing app finds and corrects hundreds of complex writing errors, so you don't have to. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. Go to getgrammarly.com/Hank when you're working on that new book before you send it to your final editor. Let Grammarly take a pass at it. You'd be surprised at what it'll catch, and your editor will thank you for it. Brand new from Stefan Bolt's The White Dragon Omnibus Edition. This book has been 2 years in the making for those of us that have been following along as Stefan has released the books Genesis, Crucible, and Alchemy. We have been on the edge of our seats waiting to see how he would finish the series, and now you can read it all in one volume. No waiting. Genesis, Crucible, and Alchemy, The White Dragon series by Stefan Boltz. Available now. There's links to it in the show notes. Untold Deception by William Stakos. I looked up. The executioner pulled the lever. Her body fell, and the crowd cheered. I couldn't watch the rest, so I lowered my eyes to the ground. I think I understand now. I get it, Mom. I now know what it means to grow up. Untold Deception by William Stakos is a book full of magic, coming-of-age story, and a story about family. Check out the link in the show notes, Untold Deception by William Stakos. Stay tuned after the show for an audiobook clip for Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kendare Blake back on the show with me. She was here last year at episode 245 in October, and we talked about this fantastic new series that she had. And we've got some more books out in the series, and so we're here to talk about it today. Welcome back to the show, Kendare.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I actually went back and listened to our previous show a while back just to kind of remember what all we talked about, and I remember gushing on and on about the new series that you had in this great concept that you came up with the princesses that are battling to be the queen, and the three dark crowns. So tell us what's been happening with you since the last time that we got to chat.
Well, since the last time, I'm also just curious. That was episode 245.
Yes,
you said, right?
Yes.
So what episode are you on now? Like how many of these do you do in about a year?
Well, when we are recording this, which is the middle of August, we just put out today episode 439.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're doing about 5
awesome.
shows. Yeah, we're doing about 5 shows a week.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a lot of author stories.
That's a lot of author stories. Yeah, it's a lot to track and keep up with. So when we talked, we talked all about Anna Dressed in Blood, and we talked about that, and then the Goddess War saga, and then we got into a little bit about the new series and that great analogy, that picture that you had of the ball of bees and how the bees were protecting the queen, and how that the queens battled for superiority until there was one queen left. And you had this great idea of like a human situation where these queens were born and they had to battle until one was left living, and one dark throne came out of that. So, kind of what's been going on since then?
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole new appreciation for bees. Not that I'm like less afraid of them now, I think, because I understand them more.
Right.
We just killed a pocket of yellow jackets at our house, which are not the same. You know, wasps are mean, but we also have just those cute fuzzy honeybees, and I used to run, but I don't anymore because I know.
Yeah, wasps are just evil. They're like Satan's henchmen or something.
Well, and we've been having a really nice relationship with our yellow jackets all summer, because they're not generally that aggressive early on in the season, but as fall comes around, they start getting twitchy because, you know, time's a wasting. They've really got to gather some stuff. So we've had a few stings, and the dogs have been getting stung. So now we're like, well, now we're going to have to kill you. I'm sorry. So, but since last year, I've been working on, actually, I've had a collection of novellas come out related, that is like a tie-in to the series. So Queens of Fennbirn was a bind-up collection that told the story of the three queens when they were children before the first book starts. And then it also told the story of the Oracle Queen, who was an ancient queen, like 500 years before the story starts. And her tale has been alluded to. So the Oracle Queen is gifted with the gift of sight. So she can sometimes read minds, or she sees prophecies. But in the current timeline, or in the current period of time, any new queen born with the sight gift is drowned because of this legendary queen who kind of lost her mind on the throne and started executing people without cause, just based off of her own paranoia. So the Black Council at the time decided, well, we can't have that anymore. So now all new queens, all babies who are born with a sight are just drowned. So that's the other story that is in the novellas. It's what actually happened back then, because history is not quite the way that, it just wasn't quite true.
Right.
So I was working on that. And I was also working on the third book, which is coming out September 4th, called Two Dark Reigns. And I think because we were working on the novellas and we were working on Two Dark Reigns, I fell behind. And so now I'm actually working on the last book, which will be the fourth full-length novel, and I'm still not done. Normally I would have been done in June. It is now August, and I am still not done. I probably won't be done until October. So that's what I've been up to.
Nice. We talked a little bit about the novellas last time, and this idea that they were going to bridge the gap a little bit, maybe between book 2 and 3, I think is what the situation was. There was originally going to be 2 books, and then they extended it to 4 books because they had been so well received. How has the writing of the novellas been for you?
It was good. Actually, a lot of the Young Queens, which is the novella about the sisters as children, I had written already. In one of the early drafts of Three Dark Crowns, I started the story at the Black Cottage when they were all still together and they were about, 6 years old and just getting ready to be separated. So I still had that saved. So I had to pull that out and rework it and then just add a little bit more. So that was fairly easy. And then writing the Oracle Queen was a lot of fun because I always knew that there was more to the Oracle Queen story than history was telling us, but I never thought that any reader would be able to would get to know that. I thought I would just know that. So it was nice to actually delve into it and learn, about everything that happened back then.
Right.
So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. I know from our last chat that you're a big fan of short stories, and that some of your favorite work has been in short stories. Do novellas give you that same kind of that difference from novel writing that you love about short stories, or is it like writing a novel just shorter? Is a novella different than both of those things, or is it more one or the other?
I would say, well, in this case, it kind of depends on the novella. Since The Young Queens was partially written, and since The Young Queens was very related, it was essentially just a prequel to the first book. Writing that kind of had more of a feel of a short story, whereas writing The Oracle Queen felt like just writing a short novel. My short stories in general, I write short stories. When I'm contacted to contribute to anthologies, they're always like, oh, can you give us something about 5,000? I'm like, yeah, if I really stretch it, because my natural short storytelling voice is usually, 25 to 3,500 words.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. That's just how it usually shakes out. Maybe because that's what my professors asked for when I was doing it in school. That could be it.
Could be.
So I don't know. I mean, I just got to work on, there's a cool Edgar Allan Poe inspired anthology coming out next year, I think, that I was asked to contribute to. It's going to have the original Poe stories that we choose and then our updated riff on it.
Oh,
so
how
our
fun.
Updated riff on that story. And it sounds like I'm really excited about the list of contributors. It's being edited by Dahlia Adler, and she's a great editor, and she put the whole thing together and had the concept. And I got to choose one of the stories, like one of the first short stories I ever read as a child, which was Metzengerstein. One of the more obscure Poe short stories. I think it might have been maybe his first or second published, and it's extremely short in itself. So she wanted something 5,000 words. I'm like, well, there's not a lot to go off of right here, because I think his is like 2,500 words. But so that was a lot of fun, and that kind of scratched my short story itch this year. I didn't get to do anything other than that.
I like shorts about that length too. It seems to me like a good short story is a lot of time, and the rules are made to be broken, obviously, but I think a lot of short stories are kind of one scene or very self-contained. When it starts growing and gets to 10,000 words or so, there's a lot going on in there, and you can kind of get lost in it. But I like a smaller, dense short story that really just packs a lot of punch in a short space. I think that's the way they're most effective, at least for me.
I do too. I agree. The stories that stick with me tend to be like that and about that length.
Right. Well, in the series that you're working on now, how do the novellas fit into the overarching narrative? Where do they fit, and what job do they do in telling the big story?
They don't really. They really don't. The Young Queens, basically it answers one of the questions that readers are left wondering, and that is, how, this is kind of spoilery, but one of the big reveals about their gifts, like what the sisters, how gifts are designated at birth. So you see that, and that answers that question. But otherwise, it's just a prequel story that gives you a little bit more context, a little bit more insight into why the sisters are the way they are, the whole nature versus nurture question. So you see how they were when they were all together, and then how they have, you see them start their lives with their new foster families on their own, and you kind of get an idea of, okay, this is why when we meet them again when they're 16, this is why they are the way they are. As far as the Oracle Queen, it's a self-contained story, and it really has nothing to do with the overall arc of the novels. All it does is it broadens the world, and it gives it more historical context. I think it was just fun. Like, it makes it feel more real to have just a completely different, just a story of a completely different historical queen, and just kind of that feeling of that there is this history and this tradition of all of these queens going back to the island's beginning, and they all had to do this. They all had to kill their sisters in order to take the throne. So Yeah. Just something, just that. It doesn't really, like, she's not going to, the Oracle Queen has been 500 years in the past. So she's long dead. She's not going to show up again, even though a queen that was dead for 400 years does show up again. But it's not her.
Yeah. Well, that does go contribute to that desire that you talked about previously on the last show about wanting to do some prequel and some sequel stuff. And, you know, when you're building a fantasy world like you've done, all of that history and the more we can dive into the setting adds texture to the world that you're building. And, you know, as a reader, I think that's one thing that we love about fantasy so much is that we get to completely immerse ourselves into another world. And anytime that we find a series that we love and an author is giving us more of that context, I think readers really love that.
I do. I love it as a reader as well. Anytime, regardless if it's fantasy or if it's contemporary horror, it's just, if you can ground it in a world that feels livable, you know, everything has more weight. Right.
Well, speaking of that, you know, when you conceived of this story, and we talked about it a few minutes ago, the bee ball and, you know, kind of that light bulb idea went off with you. So that, you know, the scenario starts unfolding, and, you know, that first book is probably fueled by a lot of that initial creative spark and the ideas flowing from that. When you then start stretching that over multiple books, how do you, as an author who's writing a longer series, how do you maintain that initial passion and that excitement for a new idea that then becomes kind of the old idea for you because you're working in this world so much and spending so many days writing, and the characters are you know, very familiar and all that? How do you keep a longer running series fueled?
Well, yeah, you're right, because at this point I've been writing within the world of Fennbirn, which is the island in Three Dark Crowns. Right. I've been writing in that for, you know, since like 2015, so a good number of years. This is going to be the longest series that I've ever written, 4 books instead of 3 like the Goddess Wars, and then you count the novellas, so, you know, 4.5 books. And I really have a handle on it now. Like I am completely in that place. I feel like I have pretty comprehensive knowledge on what's going on the island and what makes every aspect of it tick. The people, the climate, the environment. So that's kind of nice, because the first book, with the spark of that first idea, a lot of it was just still figuring around that idea. Well, what's, you know, that's the framework, but what is the rest of it? So it was figuring all of that out, you know, like what is the tradition of the island? You know, how did this come about? You know, what is the actual process for 3 sisters killing themselves after their 16th birthday? What are the ceremonies? Like, it's very ritualized. It's not just I don't just throw them in an arena and let them go at it, although that does happen at one point. That's not, you know, there are traditions and there are kind of rules that are followed. So I had to figure out all of that, and I had to get to know all these different cities full of people, because the cities in the book are kind of sequestered by their magical gift. So the elementals live in the north, the poisoners live in the capital because they've been in power for so long, the warriors live in the south, the southeast, and the naturalists live in the southwest. So I had to figure out what all those cities were, you know, how they functioned independently of themselves and then with each other, and what the people were like what the different populations were like. So now that I know all of that, I can kind of just move through the story, you know, with a little bit more focus on plot and character. I haven't had any trouble. Like, I kind of was worried that by the end of the 4th book, I'd be ready to let it go. But actually, I found that I'm sad. Like, I feel like I'm kind of dragging my heels a little bit, because I'm going to miss these characters. I've gotten really attached to them, and I'm going to miss messing around in this world. And I'm not, like, spoiler alert, I'm not going to blow up the island when at the end of the 4th book. So it'll still be there, and stuff will still be going on, but I'm not going to be telling any more of it. And that's I'm happy to discover that I'm kind of sad about that.
Well, and I think that's probably why we see a lot of authors, especially fantasy authors and science fiction authors, that people that build this world and spend so much, mental capital on a place like this that they just don't want to let the world go. And we see long running series, based in the same place. And when you're building a world, with a history, but you're really telling a story in a window of that, I can definitely see why some people just never want to, pull up stakes and move on, because you've spent all this time in here. You want to keep exploring the world, and that has to be a horribly awful decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to have a sense of like, well, this is it. You want to leave it at a good place. You don't want to beat it into the ground. Even though, I could definitely hang out there longer. Like, if you love Narnia or you love Middle Earth, there's such rich worlds. Like, as a reader, I could go back to those stories again and again and again. If they could just keep unearthing new Tolkien, I'd keep reading it. But so I don't know, like, at what point as a reader I would get tired of these worlds that I've become so attached to. And I don't know, maybe it's similar as a writer.
Yeah, and I guess as a writer, that's the challenge, to keep creating something new and to keep moving forward, because, even though you don't want to leave a world like that, at some point you're gonna feel that you need that new challenge and a new world to create. That's the kind of the writer's burden, is that when you finish one, there's something else waiting out there to be done. That's
true.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're lucky.
If we're lucky, the ability to get to do this every day is crazy enough as it is, that, if we get a new idea, that's just a blessing every day, I guess, but let's talk about the new book. Two Dark Reigns is the new book coming out. When folks are hearing this, it's be available everywhere. We'll have links to it in the show notes. But Two Dark Reigns, what is happening in this story, and where do we pick up from last time?
Well, it's hard to talk about what's happening without going into spoilers for the rest of the series, but I will try. So Two Dark Reigns picks up not long after the events of One Dark Throne. Maybe a couple of weeks have passed. I mean, it's pretty quick. So, it starts up and you figure out the end of One Dark Throne kind of scattered everyone to the winds, and you just find, the threads pick up where that left off. And, it seemed like, well, okay, so Three Dark Crowns and One Dark Throne were originally conceived as a duo. So it in itself is kind of a self-contained arc. That was the ending of One Dark Throne. When we extended the series to 4 books, I didn't change the ending of One Dark Throne. It was always going to end the way that it ended. Just with kind of a hopeful, the characters that survive, you see them go off to their new destinations, and as a reader, that's the end, and you hope, like, well, I hope they do okay, And as a writer, that was where I was at too. I'm like, well, I hope they're okay. I mean, I don't know. I'm not with them anymore, but I hope. And that's kind of why we extended the series, because that initial hoping that they were okay started to turn into, well, I wonder what they're actually doing. And then I started thinking about what they're actually doing, and I realized, well, I really would like to know what they're actually doing. But of course, the further I got into writing Two Dark Reigns, I kind of realized that maybe I would have been better off not knowing, because I could have imagined for them the happiest of endings. And now, with these 2 books, I mean, their story will really be closed up. So, and Two Dark Reigns is really the beginning of the final arc. So I like to think of them as like a duo and a duo, almost. So Two Dark Reigns and the last book are kind of a contained story, and the first 2 are a contained story.
Nice. I know we talked last time about your wonderful family and your parents who love you dearly, and you had a wonderful upbringing. But I don't know if we mentioned, do you have a sister in real life?
I don't. I have a brother.
Oh, okay. All right. Does he worry about the kind of book that you're writing and worry about his safety?
No, although it was with these books that he just started reading my books.
Oh, really?
He's not a huge reader, and I think I can blame it on he was moving and his cable took a while to be hooked up, so he just turned to my books as kind of, solace. But he's really enjoying them, so I'm glad. I haven't tried to kill him at all. I mean, we were pretty copacetic, so I don't think he has much fear.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. You said that the fourth book, you're working on it now, and it'll be out probably sometime the end of next year.
I think they've all been like September releases, so I think we're aiming to stick with next September.
Oh, that's so
It'll
awesome.
be close, but we're shooting for it.
Very good, very good. Well, I can't wait to see how the series ends. I told you last time that I had read Three Dark Crowns, and I'm through book 2 and ready to get book 3 as soon as it's released. So I'm a big fan. I love what you're doing, and I hope you. I can't wait for book 4 so I can wrap this thing up. But I love what you're doing, Kendare. If people want to get started in the book and follow along with you, where can they find you online?
They can find me almost everywhere except for Snapchat. I don't understand Snapchat, so I don't do it. I'm on Instagram. It's just my name, Kendare Blake. I think there's a little hash mark, but if you search it, you can find me. I'm on Twitter, also Kendare Blake. I have a website that's actually going to be getting a redesign pretty soon, so it'll have a nice fresh look, and that's just kendareblake.com. And you can also find me on Facebook. I don't have like an author page, but as long as you're not just going to send inappropriate photos and everything, I usually accept most friend requests. So, and that's just Kendare Blake too.
Gotcha. Kendare, we wish you continued success on book 3 when it comes out, and looking forward to it. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The brutes of the Andersonville Prison Hospital have moved me to the dead room, or so it has come to be known. None so domiciled have yet left this place. We receive only the smallest rations and only cursory care, to reduce our odors and spare the nostrils of our keepers. The good Christians of the Confederacy do not see any need to provide comfort to those who will soon sleep soundly enough underground. You must know, at least, how your father came to such an end. At Doctortown, Kilpatrick entrusted me with the conquest of a railroad trestle, and my bummers, my demolition team, acquitted themselves admirably, thanks to my ingenuity with powder. We successfully destroyed the trestle work past Morgan's Lake. This would prove to be my entire contribution to the war. Federal troops were unable to capture the bridge or overcome the enemy's battery. Kilpatrick withdrew, and my bummers and I found ourselves on the wrong side of the Altamaha River, behind the enemy line with no hope of reaching our encampment. Rebels accosted us, taking our remaining supplies. We escaped and headed south, hoping by a long march to reach Seymour's forces in Jacksonville, but we encountered other rebel encampments at Jessup. 4 of my men were lost to gunfire. We marched west, then south again, barely evading capture. We had no choice but to brave the great swamp Okefenokee. Oh, on and on it goes, in every direction, endlessly. We trudged through miles of grasping mud and noxious rot, pursued by hunger and the mosquito, scratching at our arms and faces until all our skin was scourged. We lived off alligator meat at first, then nothing at all. My men grew mutinous, blamed me for all their misfortunes, threatened to throw me in a sack, weigh me down with stones, and sink my body. Yet was I not equally hungry? Did I not starve? I grew weary of their endless insubordination and contempt. Finally, they took hold of me and swore they would hang me by the neck for leading them to ruin. They were 5 in number, younger than I and more muscular. I was no match for them physically. They laid their hands on me, and I burned them. I burned those men. The flame rose from me as from a volcano, stripping the skin from those boys, blackening their faces, roasting their flesh. And let this be my final ghastly confession. I feasted that night, feasted on the meat of my prospective murderers. And that is how I survived. I staggered alone from that swamp, a mad thing, fueled by outrage and guilt. I saw an encampment of rebel soldiers and surrendered myself gladly. They say in Andersonville prison all men are brothers, equal in filth, equal in terror, equal in ruin. Yet I feel I may claim some small distinction, at least. For I am surely damned to a greater extent than any here.